13 years of racing, 0 wins, and 0 podiums. To the untrained eye, this is the career of a driver that has lacked in driving ability and oozed mediocrity from the moment he had entered Formula 1. A couple of examples being paid drivers such as Rio Harancho and Nicholas Latifi, or just those who are unable to have standout performances in poor machinery, such as Marcus Ericsson. However, there is one outlier to this rule, Nico Hulkenberg. For the majority of his career, he has been a solid midfield driver with quick qualifying pace and good race pace, but he's just been unable to claim a podium or race win. He is the driver that holds the unenviable record of most starts without a race win, with 208 and counting. Hopefully this doesn't age as badly as my Norris prediction. I need to get this video out before he wins. Case in point, he has stayed on the grid for 13 years and had just joined Sauber to take part in Audi's 2026 projects, which will see him stay with the German team for at least 2 years. So let us look at the highs and lows of Hulk's career, and ultimately what led Audi to take him onto their project in lieu of his results in F1. And if you are new to the channel, please like the video. It really does help the algorithm deliver my video to new people, and if you like my content, feel free to subscribe. So hello everyone, I'm TMWF1, and let's take a look at Nico Hulkenberg. Nicholas Hulkenberg was born on the 19th of August 1987 in West Germany. Hulkenberg was one of the drivers that you just knew throughout his junior career that he was going to make it to Formula 1 when looking at his junior Formula record. His karting accolades consist of the German Junior Karting Championship and the German Kart Championship. He made his car racing debut in the Formula BMW series in 2005, ahead of future F1 talent Sebastian Buemi and part-time Chinese Formula 4 driver Sergio Perez. The next year, he contested in the A1 Grand Prix series, which is essentially an attempt at a de facto World Cup for racing, as drivers raced under their represented countries. This failed horribly and was cancelled after 4th season. Hulkenberg channeled his inner 2014 Germany and won the series with 9 wins, clicking the whole grid and scoring more points than the team in second place. In 2007, he contested in European F3, finishing third behind 2 very underrated future F1 drivers, albeit one more crash prone than the other, Romain Grosjean and Kumi Kobayashi. In 2008, he won the series with 7 wins, promoting a move to GP2, the modern day F2, and a test with Williams Racing. However, he first contested in the GP2 Asia series, which is more of an off-season championship. He missed 2 rounds and only could finish P6, but then came the main GP2 series. Hulkenberg absolutely destroyed everyone in that championship, with a grid consisting of 9 future F1 drivers. This prompted Williams Racing to do some scouting, and on the 2nd of November 2009, Hulkenberg was announced as a Williams F1 driver alongside veteran Rubens Barrichello on the back of a very successful 2009 with Braun GP. If there was a single word I could use to describe Nico Hulkenberg's rookie season in Formula 1, it would be the term mid. The 2020 Williams was such a solid midfield car in the hands of both drivers, but Rubens just had the edge on him during the races. In Bahrain, he spun on the opening few laps and eventually finished P14. His first points didn't come until the 3rd round in Malaysia, where he qualified P5 ahead of his teammate and eventually finished P10. His best finish in 2010 was P6 at the Hungarian Grand Prix, but overall he was usually beaten in qualifying and in the races by his teammate Barrichello. There was but one notable achievement in his rookie season that made everyone stand up and take notice.
I felt good, I had a good rhythm and I was just pushing as hard as I could, and my engineer told me I have a good pace. But then, you know, I expected when he came on the radio that he said, yeah, you're PP5, P6, you know, the usual stuff, but then he said you're pole position.
Nico Hulkenberg had taken pole in a wet Q3 session by a second in a Williams. It was an insane result to achieve, especially in his rookie season, and there was no doubt that Nico was a rising talent in F1. He finished 4 places below his teammate in P14 over the season, but his first season was one of getting settled in F1 and getting used to the car. So Williams, in their absolute wisdom, drops him for 2011. To this day, I don't understand why this action was taken by Frank Williams, especially as soon as the race after he got pole. Well, one must assume that Hulkenberg would be replaced by someone better than him as a driver, right? Right? Williams had replaced Hulkenberg with Pastor Maldonado, a man who Hulkenberg drove alongside in the 2009 GP2 Championship. So surely they must have, been in a title battle together, right? Nope, Hulkenberg beat Maldonado by 64 points. I don't know what was going on in that Williams garage, but that decision must have been made by the same people who officiate VAR, because that stinks of PGMOL right there. Moving on before I suffer a brain aneurysm, in 2011 Hulkenberg left Williams to join Force India as a reserve and test driver, competing in the majority of FP1 sessions. For 2012 he was promoted to a full-time seat after the demotion of Adrian Sittel to reserve driver. The 2012 Force India was a fairly decent midfield car, but also had the unfortunate timing of being in possibly the tightest midfield of all time, with the 8th fastest car to even the top 3 not being separated by much in some races. Hulkenberg had a pretty decent time in the Force India, managing to beat his teammate De Resta by 17 points. During the 2012 season, Hulkenberg had a best finish of P4 at the Belgian Grand Prix, after being overtaken by Raikkonen and Vettel whilst running P2. He finished the championship in P11, capping off a pretty good season. But the good drives that he completed were forgotten due to one race. It was the final round of the 2012 championship. Fernando Alonso sapped 14 points adrift from the Red Bull of Sebastian Vettel. Hulkenberg had qualified P6 after Maldonado was given a grid penalty. Go figure. The lights go out and immediately Vettel is spun and drops down the order. Hulkenberg ends lap 1 in P5. 5 laps later and he's in P3 after overtaking Fernando Alonso. He then overcuts the McLaren of Hamilton and overtook the other McLaren of Button to lead the Brazilian Grand Prix. This lead lasted 38 laps and the gap was 45, yes, 45 seconds until the safety car was called out, and then Hamilton re-overtook him for the lead. But Nico was hungry for his first win. Finally, there was an opportunity on lap 55, and then he crashed into Hamilton. As a result, he was given a drive-through penalty and ended up finishing 5th, with his resultant safety car giving Button the win and Vettel the championship. All things considered though, it was an amazing drive from Hulkenberg, whose pace was staggering in the car that finished 7th in the World Constructors' Championship. Just before season's end, it was announced that Hulkenberg would leave Force India and move to Sauber to replace the departing Sergio Perez, who moved to McLaren in response to Hamilton's move to replace the retiring Michael Schumacher at Mercedes. His 1-year stint at Sauber was pretty decent. The C32 was not as high as flying as the C31, but Hulkenberg extracted all that he could out of the car and absolutely demolished his teammate Esteban Gutierrez, scoring 51 points compared to his teammate 6. His standout performances came at Kota, qualifying P4 and finishing P6, Japan, finishing P6 again, Italy, qualifying P3 and only being overtaken by the 2 Ferraris of Alonso and Massa to finish P5, and his joint best finish in F1. Starting P8 at the South Korean Grand Prix, but executing a brilliant strategy coupled with great defending to finish P4. He scored points 10 times over the course of the year and ended the season in P10, which at that point was his best finish in F1. Then Force India, who had seen how much Hulkenberg had improved his racecraft, came calling, and he was re-signed for 2014 alongside Sergio Perez. The year was 2014, and Hulkenberg was back at Force India. There was a massive overhaul of the regulations, such as the changes of the chassis and the front nose, for the worse, and the most notable of all, the V8 engines being swapped for V6 turbo hybrid engines. Now, as you all know, this engine change benefited the Mercedes cars greatly as they had the most efficient engines, and it just so happened that Force India were a Mercedes customer team, meaning that the car's straight line speed was improved exponentially. 2014 was a breakthrough year for Hulkenberg in terms of establishing himself as one of the best midfield drivers in Formula 1. He finished P6 at Melbourne after Daniel Ricciardo was disqualified, and then followed that up with a run of 9 consecutive points finishes, including 4 P5s, a P6 and a P7, in a grid where the pace deficit was minimal between the 2nd fastest car and the 6th fastest car. At one point, Hulkenberg sat P3 in the Drivers' Championship 4 rounds in, only behind the 2 Mercedes cars. Unfortunately, towards the end of 2014, the pace of the car slightly dropped off, but Hulkenberg only finished out the points twice and had 2 retirements alongside that. He absolutely demolished his new teammate Sergio Perez, finishing with 96 points compared to Perez's 59, and finished the 2014 World Drivers' Championship in a career best 9th place. This earned him a 2-year contract with Force India. Unfortunately, 2015 was not as successful as the year prior for Hulkenberg, at least in F1. He finished P7 in Australia, but then embarked on a 5-race pointless streak, which only ended at Canada. That season, his best finish was a P5 in Monza, his only top 5 finish of the season. He was beaten by a resurgent Sergio Perez, who managed to score 2 podiums and finish 20 points ahead of Hulkenberg. It may seem that this year was a failure, but he saved the season in the most extraordinary way. He competed in the LMP1 class of Le Mans and won the 24 Hours of Le Mans at his first attempt for Porsche, beating former F1 race winner and permanent number 2 driver Mark Webber and future F1 failure and Le Mans farmer Brendan Hartley in the other Porsche. It was an emphatic victory which many have called the highlight of his racing career. For 2016, rumours started to circulate that Hulkenberg was unsettled within Force India and wanted to leave the team, with potential candidates being Renault or McLaren. 2016 was much like 2015, being beaten once again by Sergio Perez by 29 points this time. His best finish of the season was P4 at the Belgian Grand Prix after being overtaken by Hamilton and Ricciardo. Another highlight was qualifying on the front row for the Austrian Grand Prix after Nico Rosberg was given a 5-place grid penalty, but he had to retire from the race with brake issues. He also lost the potential podium at the Monaco Grand Prix when running a comfortable P3, got caught in traffic after his pit stop and eventually finished P6 with his teammate Perez finishing on the podium instead. After retiring from the Singapore Grand Prix, Hulkenberg announced that he would be leaving Force India for the newly revamped Renault outfit. He capped off his time at Force India with a run of 7th place finishes, equaling his best World Drivers' Championship finish in P9 and helping Force India to finish 4th in the championship. "2017 had rolled around, and there were brand new regulations that had been brought to the Formula 1 grid. The chassis and tyres were made wider, the cars decreased in height, and the downforce of the cars were increased significantly, allowing for some of the fastest F1 cars the world has ever seen. In 2016, the Renault F1 team was a backmarker, suffering the decline of the Lotus F1 team it had inherited. With the new regulations, it was thrust firmly into the midfield again and was amongst the Force India's, Haas's and Williams cars. Hulkenberg's teammate for 2017 would be Jolyon Palmer. Yes, the guy from the F1 analysis videos was actually an F1 driver 7 years ago. Crazy, right? It's like if the pundit Paul di Resta was an F1 driver. Oh wait, he drove in 2017 too. Back to my point, Hulkenberg's teammate was Palmer. Fortunately for Hulkenberg, Jolyon took after his dad Jonathan Palmer, meaning he was shit. This unfortunately meant that Renault had a hard time scoring constructors' points. Hulkenberg carried the team on his back, scoring 5 points finishes in the first 10 races, including 2 P6 finishes at Spain and Britain. He also scored 34 points to Palmer's 0 during that time. Unfortunately, Hulkenberg can't have a good season without a podium fumble. At the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, he was running P6 when he hit the wall and eventually retired. This was whilst being ahead of eventual podium sitter and rookie Lance Stroll, who finished 3rd. At the Singapore Grand Prix, the Renault management had finally had enough and announced that Palmer will be replaced by Toro Rosso driver Carlos Sainz from the USA Grand Prix onwards. Ironically, Palmer finished P6 that race. Come the US Grand Prix, and Sainz had replaced Palmer for the rest of the 2017 season. Hulkenberg failed to finish from the Japanese Grand Prix to the Mexican Grand Prix, which was then followed up by a P7 at Brazil and a P6 finish at Abu Dhabi to allow Renault to overtake Toro Rosso in the standings for P6, a vast improvement from P9 the year prior. Hulkenberg finished P10 on 43 points, scoring 75% of the team's points, but it must be noted that Sainz finished ahead of him in an inferior car, and he was far better calibre of a driver than Palmer. In 2018, Renault made another jump up the grid. This time, the car's pace had improved to the upper midfield. Now with a strong and stable lineup of Hulkenberg and Sainz, Renault were here to make a statement on the grid. Hulkenberg made a massive impact at the start of 2018, finishing in P7 and P6 twice in the first 3 races. And then came the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, and just like last year, it appears that Nico cannot have a good season without a podium fumble. He started in P14, made his way up to P5 within 10 laps, and then hit the wall in a carbon copy of last year's race. This is starting to get extremely depressing now. His luck would not improve, with him being absolutely discombobulated by Grosjean on lap 1. He then had a run of top 10 finishes, excluding Austria, from Monaco to Germany, finishing P6 at the British Grand Prix and P5 at his home race, the German Grand Prix. He then only scored 1 point until the USA Grand Prix? The RSA team was a weird car in 2018, having pace closer to the Red Bull in some races and having pace closer to the Williams cars in others. He ended the season with 2 P6 finishes at Kota and Mexico, and suffered 2 retirements to end the season, being a Grosjean victim for the second time that season at Abu Dhabi. Despite this, he ended the season in P7, best of the rest and his best finish in F1 to date, finishing 2 places above his teammate. It was an amazing return to form for Hulkenberg, which put him on the map for potential top teams who were looking for drivers. Luck finally seemed to be on Hulkenberg's side. And then 2019 happened. "2019 rolled around, and it was all changed down at Renault. Carlos Sainz departed for McLaren to replace the retiring Alonso, who decided he wanted to race until the age of 72 years later. Replacing Sainz was an informed Daniel Ricciardo, who was tired of the poor reliability in the Renault engine in the Red Bull, and so left Red Bull to join Renault." I can't believe he did this. What was in his head? This would be a real testament of Hulkenberg's talent, as Ricciardo, contrary to 2024, was one of the fastest drivers on the grid, but it was expected that Hulkenberg would rise to the challenge, as he always does. But the thing is, he never did. He finished P14 on 34 points, 5 places and 20 points below his teammate Ricciardo, who had just joined the team. It was an absolutely wretched year for Hulkenberg, with a couple of P7s and P5 at Monza being his main highlight. But the one race that stood out to me has to be Germany 2019. Hulkenberg had qualified P9 and began the race under extremely wet conditions. He slowly made up his way to P4 whilst drivers around him slid off track, most notably Perez, Leclerc and Hamilton. He then pitted for slicks and came out in P2 behind Verstappen. Hulkenberg was in a great position with the Mercedes cars not firing up their tyres in the damp conditions and Albon being a buffer in the Toro Rosso to hold back Vettel. All he had to do was keep it on track.
There is the Renault of Nico Hulkenberg, and he's ending his home Grand Prix in the barriers, and another car.
On lap 34, he dipped a wheel into the wet drag strip and became beached in the gravel. And that was it. Another chance for a podium, his best chance in 7 years, gone. Just like that. Not only was he devastated, the team principal of Renault, Cyril Abiteboul, took a very hard stance on Hulkenberg's plethora of missed chances. And 2 races later, it was announced that Nico Hulkenberg will be dropped for Esteban Ocon at the end of the season. It was a truly humbling and torrid season for Hulkenberg, from best of the rest in 2018 to drop from the team in 2019. A lot can change in a year. 2020 was a strange year for everyone in F1. Not only did we start the season in the middle of June, we also had to deal with the prospect of no fans at races, which hugely deflated the atmosphere on and off track. Hulkenberg seemed to be enjoying life off the grid, with him spending time with his family and children, and not particularly doing anything racing related, apart from signing as reserve driver for Racing Point. Whether that was down to the pandemic or just his decision, we will probably never know. But there was one incident that was about to throw Hulk's career back into gear. At the British Grand Prix, Sergio Perez had tested positive for COVID-19. A replacement for him was needed, and a certain Nico Hulkenberg just happened to be at Silverstone that weekend, so he stepped in for the doubleheader at Silverstone. In his first outing, Hulkenberg qualified P13, which was a good showing considering that this was his first F1 race in over 6 months. However, due to engine issues, he was unable to start the race, but at his second attempt at the track next round, something incredible happened. Hulkenberg had qualified P3 for the first time since 2016, beating out the likes of his teammate Stroll, the 2 McLarens and the Renault cars, and also Max Verstappen in a Red Bull. He fell down the order due to tyre issues in the race and finished P7, but this was a showcase that he really didn't deserve to be out of a seat in F1. But then the Spanish GP rolled around and Perez had recovered and Hulkenberg was left without a seat once again. But then it happened again. This time Stroll had contracted COVID just after FP2 at the Nürburgring, and Hulkenberg was frantically flown out to get in the car. He missed FP3 and only had Q1 to get some laps in the car. He qualified last, obviously, but was only 4 tenths away from the cut-off time for Q2, which is an amazing and an extremely underrated feat in my opinion. And what's better, he fought his way to P8 and points in the race, earning him driver of the day. I know that means nothing with Norris on the grid now, but you know, the small things count. Stroll had recovered for Portugal, and this time Hulkenberg really was out of a seat. Not for 2020, but for 2021 as well. It looked as if Hulkenberg's F1 career was over. And then it happened again! Actually, before I continue, let me provide some context. Albon at Red Bull was being shit, and Perez, having won a race, moved to Red Bull from 2021 onwards. Sebastian Vettel then moved to newly renamed Aston Martin to replace Perez, and in 2022 he fell victim to COVID. Hulkenberg was drafted in for the first 2 races of 22. Did he perform wonders like he did in 2020? No, he finished 17th in Bahrain and 12th in Saudi Arabia before Vettel had recovered. After those races, it finally seemed that Hulkenberg was finished with F1. There were hardly any seats available on the grid, and there was no chance of Hulkenberg joining Aston Martin, who had signed Alonso shortly after the Piastri Alpine thing. However, as the season dragged on, a rumour started that Mick Schumacher was to be ousted from Haas at the end of the season due to his frequent crashes and his poor performances. It did seem to be just that, a rumour. It was very unlikely that the son of Michael Schumacher would be kicked out of Haas after just 2 seasons. It was just a pipe dream for Hulkenberg, right? Right? The Hulk is back, baby, let's go! On the 8th of November 2022, it was announced that Mick Schumacher was to be dropped from the Haas F1 team as a result of poor performances. It was quite a shock that Haas dropped a young driver, especially the son of Schumacher, for a seemingly old Hulkenberg, and it was just assumed that this was a mistake and Mick should have been given 1 more year. Personally, I agreed at the time with this opinion, due to how Schumacher is a late bloomer when it comes to racing series. For example, his F2 title win after 2 years. But there was a lot of disdain amongst F1 fans who anticipated Hulkenberg would do no better than Schumacher did. And oh boy, how wrong we were. In a Haas car which was, in a word, abysmal, Hulkenberg extracted the most he could out of the mobility scooter on Pirellis. In qualifying, he got the worst car on the grid into Q3 11 times over the course of 2023. An insane feat. This includes qualifying P4 at the Austrian Sprint and qualifying on the front row at the Canadian Grand Prix, which still just blows my mind. But TMW, you may ask, how come Hulkenberg only scored 9 points all season if he started in positions like those? Well, there was one major issue with the VF23, as there had been for most Haas cars since they joined in 2016. It absolutely destroys the tyres. Whenever Hulkenberg managed to qualify in the top 10, he would be in P15 by lap 7. He only managed to score points at the Wet Austria Sprint after being second for most of it before the tyres fell off, and the latest podium fumble of the list, the 2023 Australian Grand Prix. Granted, this one is not his fault, however it must still be counted. Hulkenberg had qualified P10 as usual. He had a decent race at one of the only tracks where his tyres didn't add to the 1.5 kilograms missing from Russell's car. But then his teammate, who had had a stinker that season, crashed into the wall 3 laps from the end, bringing out the red flag. So the FIA, using all of their 6 collective brain cells, restarted the grid with 2 laps to go in the name of competition and not regarding anything else, like how the rest of the grid were going to kill each other.
Hey, I've seen this one. This is a classic.
What do you mean you've seen this? It's brand new.
The lights go out and immediately chaos ensues. Sainz spins Alonso, the 2 Alpines crash, who would have thought? Stroll goes off, who would have thought? And De Vries and Sargent crashed, who would have thought? At the end of all this chaos, Hulkenberg sat P4 behind Verstappen, Hamilton and Sainz. Another red flag came out and it was announced that the race would end behind the safety car. Sainz got a penalty for destroying Alonso, and the final order was Verstappen, Hamilton and Hulkenberg. Wait, Hulkenberg P3? Did he finally do it after 12 years? He finally got his moment. The thing that plagued his whole career is what would have happened if the FIA weren't bitches. Instead, they reverted the order to the previous grid start as no one had passed sector 1 before they brought out the red flag, and Hulkenberg was demoted to P7. This one was upsetting, but mainly because it was none of his fault. He only finished P16 in the championship, his worst result to date, but his qualifying performances and his team leadership meant that he could be proud of 2023. And finally, his luck was about to improve. For 2024, Steiner was released from the role of team principal and Ayo Komatsu was drafted from within to lead the team forward. The VF24 wasn't expected to be much due to how last year went, but we were in for a surprise. Hulkenberg started where he left off, qualifying P10 in Bahrain but falling off in the race. It looked to be the same season for Hulkenberg, but then he scored a point in Saudi Arabia, then 2 in Australia, 1 in China, another 2 in Miami Sprint, a run of 4 P11 finishes, then 2 back-to-back P6 finishes in Austria and Britain. Throughout this period, he outqualified Sergio Perez in the Red Bull. The VF24 had finally fixed its tyre problem, and finally Hulkenberg started to cook. At the time of writing, it is the summer break and Hulkenberg currently sits P11 in the championship, a massive upgrade from P3. So far, it's been great. We'll see how he finishes the rest of the season. And now, we wait. We wait to see how Audi performs from 2026 onwards, and how Hulk will work within the team. At the start of the video, I speculated as to why Audi had even chosen Hulkenberg, not even really knowing myself. Now, as I finish off this video, I realise why. It's his consistency, and even more importantly, his longevity. Hulkenberg is an extremely solid driver who's always been there or thereabouts on the grid since he joined F1. A new team, such as Audi, needs to have someone like Hulkenberg to have a proper bearing on what a good driver is like. Furthermore, the amount of experience and driver knowledge that Hulkenberg brings to the team is valuable, as seen with Haas. The cherry on top would have been to bring in Sainz, who has similar knowledge but at a top team, but he has decided to go to Williams. I really do hope that Hulkenberg can succeed with Audi and maybe even grab that elusive podiums. Who knows? A man can dream. But what do you guys think of Hulkenberg? Comment down your thoughts below about the man and his move to Audi. Despite how long it took to come out, it was a pleasure making this video. Thanks for watching and goodbye.